What if the person you loved the most, the one you trusted with your entire life, was hiding a secret so shocking, so unthinkable, that it shattered everything you believed? What if, late one night, you stumbled upon something so disturbing you wished you had never found out? That's exactly what happened to James. It was just another ordinary night. He was getting ready for bed when he heard a noise coming from the garage. At first, he ignored it. Probably just the wind, he thought. But then, he heard it again. A voice, a whisper, a giggle. His gut told him something wasn't right. Curiosity turned to suspicion. Suspicion turned to fear. James moved closer, his heart pounding, his hands shaking. He pressed his ear against the door, and that's when he heard it. A sound that made his stomach drop. A soft, unmistakable kiss. His mind raced, his breathing grew shallow. Was it a mistake? His wife was asleep, wasn't she? No, she wasn't in bed when he checked. The pieces clicked together like a slow, torturous mystery. And in that moment, James knew he had to open that door. What he saw next changed his life forever. And what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, trust, and betrayal. Welcome to True Crime Excavate, your portal for gripping explorations into the world of real crime. Here, we dissect chilling cases, delve into unsolved mysteries, and recount tales of scandal and deception. From notorious cold cases to captivating courtroom battles and profiles of infamous criminals. True Crime Excavate offers a wide-ranging look at the darker side of humanity. Join us as we sift through the evidence, analyze motives, and uncover hidden truths behind the stories that keep the world captivated. Subscribe and become part of a community dedicated to unraveling mysteries and seeking justice. Stay until the end, because the truth is even darker than you think. James had always been a man of patience, a man of routine. But life had its own way of testing him. A tragic accident had left him paralyzed from the waist down, forcing him into a wheelchair. It had been years since he last walked, yet he never let it define him. And through it all, there was one person who had been by his side, his wife, Lillian. She had been his rock, his caretaker, the one who promised to stay through sickness and health. And James, he trusted her with his life. But on this night, something felt off. Something didn't add up. It started with a simple sound, faint, almost unnoticeable at first. A rustling noise barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. James was in the living room reading when he heard it. It came from outside, the garage. He glanced at the clock. 2:14 a.m. Strange. Who would be in the garage at this hour? He wheeled himself closer to the window, peering through the blinds. The garage light was on. His heart skipped a beat. Had Lillian forgotten to turn it off? Number, she wasn't in bed when he checked earlier. Maybe she had trouble sleeping. Maybe she was just organizing something. But then he heard it again. A voice. A low murmur. Someone was in there. And she wasn't alone. James swallowed hard, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair. His mind raced. Was someone in trouble? Or was this something worse? Every instinct in him screamed to turn back, to pretend he heard nothing, but he couldn't. He had to know. With slow, deliberate movements, he wheeled himself toward the garage door. Every push of his wheels echoed in the empty house. His breath was shallow, his fingers cold. The closer he got, the heavier the air felt. And then He stopped, right at the door, just inches away. The voices were clearer now, a whisper, a hushed giggle, and then a sound that made his stomach drop, a soft, unmistakable kiss. James froze. His mind screamed at him to move, to do something, but he couldn't. He was paralyzed, not just in his legs, but in his very soul. Who was in there with his wife? What was she hiding? And why? Why did it feel like the walls were closing in on him? James took a deep breath, and with a shaking hand, he reached for the door handle. What he was about to see would change his life forever. This wasn't the first time James had questioned Lillian's behavior. The signs had been there, small at first, almost too subtle to notice. But over time, they became impossible to ignore. It started a few months ago. Lillian had grown distant. She was always on her phone, smiling at messages she never shared. When he asked, she would brush it off. Just work stuff, she'd say. But James noticed how quickly she tucked her phone away whenever he wheeled into the room. How her once warm, loving eyes now carried a flicker of something else. Something guarded. Then came the late nights. Lillian had always been an early sleeper, curling up beside him by 10 p.m. But now she was restless. She'd tell him she couldn't sleep, that she was going to the kitchen for tea. Yet, James would wake hours later to find her side of the bed still cold. When he asked the next morning, she'd smile and say, "You were asleep, I didn't want to wake you." At first, James tried to believe her. He wanted to believe her. But then there was the garage. He never had much reason to go in there. After his accident, he stopped working on the old tools and projects he once loved. The garage became her space, somewhere she stored things, did occasional repairs. But lately, she had been spending more time there. Too much time. One night, when she was out running an errand, James decided to take a closer look. With slow, careful movements, he wheeled himself to the garage, his hands sweating against the rubber grips of his chair. At first glance, everything seemed normal: boxes, a workbench, storage bins. But then, he noticed something odd. There were 2 coffee mugs on the workbench. One was hers. The other? A black ceramic mug he had never seen before. His heart pounded. He reached out, touching the rim, still faintly warm. Someone had been here recently. His eyes darted across the space. That's when he noticed something else, a faint scent in the air. Cologne, masculine, expensive, not his. The realization hit him like a fist to the gut. He wheeled backward, his breath quickening. He didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe she had a friend over. Maybe there was an explanation. But deep down, he knew. From that night on, James paid closer attention. He started noticing the little details. Lillian's hurried showers after coming in from the garage, the way she always locked the door behind her, the way she flinched when he mentioned it in passing. So, he decided to test her. One evening, he casually asked her to grab something from the garage while he watched. Her reaction was instant. Her body tensed. A flicker of panic crossed her face before she forced a smile and said, "It's a mess in there. I'll get it later." That was all the confirmation he needed. For weeks he waited, watching, listening, trying to catch her slipping, until tonight, when he finally heard the voices, the laughter, the kiss. And now, as he sat at the garage door, hand on the handle, heart racing in his chest, James knew that there was no turning back. The truth was waiting for him on the other side, and he was about to face it. James took a deep breath, his fingers trembling on the door handle. The cold metal felt heavy, like it carried the weight of everything he feared. His mind screamed at him to stop, to turn back and pretend he never heard anything. But it was too late. The truth was waiting for him on the other side. With a slow, deliberate motion, he pushed the door open. The creak of the hinges sliced through the silence. The garage was dimly lit, the overhead bulb casting long, eerie shadows. At first, his eyes struggled to adjust. His heart pounded against his ribs as he scanned the room, breath held tight in his chest. And then he saw them. Lillian, standing in the middle of the garage. Her back was to him, but he recognized her instantly. The curve of her shoulders, the familiar way she held herself. She was close to someone. Too close. A man, tall, dark-haired, his face partially obscured by the shadows, but James didn't need to see him clearly, he already knew. For a moment, everything stopped. The world around James seemed to shrink, the sounds dulling into an eerie, suffocating silence. He watched as the man reached for Lillian, fingers grazing her cheek with an intimacy that sent a blade of ice through James's spine. And then, the kiss. Soft, slow, familiar. Not the desperate, guilty kind of kiss James had imagined. No, but this was something worse. Something practiced. Comfortable. Like two people who had done this 1,000 times before. James felt the breath leave his body. A sharp, unbearable ache bloomed in his chest, spreading like poison through his veins. He wanted to move, to speak, to do something, but he couldn't. His body refused to obey him, just as it had ever since the accident. His grip tightened on the wheels of his chair. His throat burned with unspoken words, his mind racing in circles. Was this real? Was this happening? The woman who had stood by his side through everything, the one who had promised to love him in sickness and in health, was now standing before him, locked in the arms of another man. The world came rushing back all at once, the sounds sharpened, the hushed whispers, the rustling of fabric, and the soft exhale of pleasure that escaped Lillian's lips as she pulled away. That sound shattered him. Without thinking, without warning, James let out a choked breath, a sound that was half a gasp, half a broken sob. Lillian froze. The man turned first, his face bathed in the dim light. Shock flashed across his features, but there was something else too, something that made James's stomach churn. No guilt, no fear, just irritation. As if James had interrupted something. Then Lillian turned. The look in her eyes nearly killed him. It wasn't horror. It wasn't regret. It was fear. Not fear of being caught, but fear of what came next, of what James would do, of what this moment meant. For a long, suffocating second, no one moved, no one spoke. The weight of reality hung between them, thick and suffocating. James felt something inside him crack, something fragile and sacred that he had clung to for years. The illusion was gone, the trust was shattered. His voice, when he finally found it, was barely more than a whisper. How long? Lillian's lips parted, but no words came out. Her face twisted with something he couldn't quite place. Shame, pity, or something worse, something colder? The man, her lover, stepped forward slightly, his posture still too casual, too composed. James's skin crawled. Lillian finally spoke, her voice hoarse. Weak. James, He held up a hand. He didn't want to hear it. He couldn't hear it. He had already seen enough. James wheeled himself back, his body numb, his mind a storm of shattered memories and broken vows. He had imagined this moment so many times, what he would say, what he would do. But now that it was here, he felt nothing but hollow, empty silence. Lillian took a step toward him. He flinched. And that was when he saw it, the final, cruel truth that broke him completely. The way her eyes flickered, not with love, not with regret, but with relief. Relief that the secret was finally out. James exhaled sharply, shaking his head. He had lost her long before this moment. He just hadn't wanted to see it. Without another word, he turned his chair and wheeled away, leaving behind everything he thought he knew, everything he thought he had, and the woman who had already left him long ago. James wheeled himself back into the house, his breath shallow, his mind increased into a void of rage and devastation. His hands trembled on the wheels of his chair, his knuckles white with pressure. His heart pounded so violently it felt like his ribs would crack under the force. But beneath the heartbreak, beneath the betrayal, something else took root. Something dark, something final. As he moved through the house, the sounds from the garage continued. Whispered words, soft laughter, and then a sound that made his entire body stiffen. A moan. Lillian's moan. The same sound he had once believed was meant for him. They weren't even stopping. They knew he was there. They knew he had seen them. And yet, they continued. As if his presence didn't matter. As if he were nothing. As if he were too weak, too broken, too powerless to do anything about it. A fresh wave of humiliation burned through him. His wife, his partner, the woman who had once promised to stand by him, wasn't just betraying him. She was mocking him. Her silence, her inaction, her sheer audacity to continue right in front of him. It was a message. One louder than words. You are nothing, James. James wheeled himself down the hall, his breath slow, controlled. He passed the family pictures on the wall. The smiling wedding photo, the anniversary snapshots, lies, every single one of them. His fingers curled against the armrests of his chair as he reached the bedroom. The drawer. The gun. It had been years since he had even touched it. A relic of another life. A life where he was still whole, still respected. His hand found the cold steel grip, the weight of it grounding him in reality. He checked the chamber. Loaded. Ready. A lifetime of memories flooded his mind. The nights he had held Lillian close, whispering dreams about their future. The nights he had cried in her arms, believing she was the only one who understood his pain. And now the truth was undeniable. She had never truly been his. He had been living in a lie, and she had been waiting for him to fade away. James wheeled himself back toward the garage, the gun resting on his lap. The whispers had turned to quiet gasps, bodies moving together in a rhythm that sent bile rising in his throat. He reached the door and pushed it open. This time, there was no hesitation. Lillian and the man, her lover, barely reacted. They turned, their faces flushed, their bodies tangled. And then Lillian did something that sealed her fate. She smirked. A smug, condescending smirk, the kind that said she had already won, that he was just a spectator in his own downfall, that he was weak. James didn't say a word, didn't shout, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. He simply raised the gun. Lillian's eyes widened, her body jerking upright. James! Her voice was suddenly laced with panic, her smirk vanishing in an instant. Wait, just... The first shot tore through her chest before she could finish. The force sent her backward, a strangled gasp escaping her lips as she crumpled onto the concrete floor. The lover, who had been so cocky just moments ago, lunged forward, panic in his eyes. "James, listen, man, The second shot struck him square between the eyes. His body went limp before it even hit the ground. The silence that followed was deafening. James sat there, motionless, staring at the two lifeless bodies sprawled out before him. Blood pooled beneath them, staining the cold grey floor. The air was thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder and death. He expected to feel something, relief, satisfaction, regret. But all he felt was emptiness. The gun slipped from his fingers, clattering against the floor. He wheeled himself back, his breath slow and steady. There was no rush, no panic. He had already died long before this night. For the first time in years, James felt in control. And that was all that mattered. The silence in the garage didn't last long. The gunshots had shattered more than just flesh and bone. They had shattered the night itself. Neighbors, jolted awake by the sound, called the police. And when the authorities arrived, they found James exactly where he had been, still in his wheelchair, still staring at the bodies of his wife and her lover, the gun resting on the floor beside him. He didn't resist, he didn't fight, he didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. James was arrested that night, charged with double homicide. His trial was swift, the evidence undeniable. The prosecution painted him as a man consumed by jealousy, driven to commit an unspeakable act. His defense argued that he had been pushed beyond his breaking point, betrayed by the one person he trusted most. But in the end, the verdict was clear: guilty. Sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And so the man who had once built a life with Lillian now sat behind bars, trading one prison for another. Only this time there were no illusions, no lies, no false hopes of love and loyalty. But was it justice? Or was it something else? James had spent years bound by the limitations of his body, feeling powerless in a world that had moved on without him. That night in the garage, he had taken control. But at what cost? Was it revenge? Was it justice? Or was it just another kind of prison? And now I ask you, the viewer, was James right to do what he did? Was the murder justified? Or did he let his pain destroy him completely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe the murder was justified, or did James go too far? Let's discuss. And if you enjoyed this story and want more gripping, thought-provoking content, be sure to check out our other videos. We have plenty of thrilling, real-life inspired stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.